Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. The use case is to be able to implement for one of my clients. They use two packages. They use Optimizely and LaunchDarkly, but they don't use either of those tools for analysis. So oftentimes what they're doing is just using Amplitude Analytics for analysis, but I'd like to get it actually configured using an exposure event and put it into Experiment. And so trying to get that set up, I was running into some roadblocks. For example, the flag keys when setting up an experiment said that it had to be all lowercase and dashes or underscores. And I said, okay, fine, I can change my flag key and make some updates there. But then I can't get the experiment to start. It says like, you need to have the SDK. We have to check your website underneath experiments. So just curious, is it possible to just send it exposure events and then be in the Amplitude ecosystem, use experiment, use analytics and create cohorts and whatever you're doing? Because setting up the event stream to send exposure events to Amplitude was beautifully easy. I really would love to be able to use the interface for measuring stat sig and things like that. It just seemed like I blocked, and I'm just curious, is that true? Do we have to have the SDK in order to turn on an experiment?
Just a quick question on that. I mean, if you're already running your experiments in the other platforms that you've got, then as long as you're sending the correct event that maps to the exposure event, then you could use the experiment results chart to look at the results for your experiment.
Doesn't look like it. Even though we're on the growth plan, it's just blocked off. I can't access the experiment's results chart. I can't go into experiment to like see metrics or configure metrics. And so there's basically unblocked all that. So I expected the experiment results chart as one of the charts to be available through the growth plan.
That is something that I'll have to check if the Amplitude results chart is available for you or not in your plan. But that is something that I've seen a lot of customers do, where they bring in data and then just use the experiment results chart to look at the results of their experiment.
Do you need the SDK to like configure an experiment underneath experiments?
I mean, if you're using Amplitude Experiment, then you need the SDK, because then that
we're not using Amplitude Experiment, but I can't start. The start button is grayed out. So we're sending exposure events. It seems to me we're sending the events. It's an exposure event. So I set the flag key and send the exposure events, but I can't hit the start button because it says it's not, my experiment isn't configured.
Got it.
Because it's looking for a script tag, which is kind of silly.
Right.
I don't need a script tag. We also do server-side events, meaning there wouldn't be a script tag to run experiment.
Correct. And that experiment that you set up in Amplitude, was it just a feature experiment, or was that like a web experiment that you tried to set up?
When I go into Amplitude, underneath experiment, there's overview, experiments, feature flags, deployment. So I did experiments.
And then did you try to create an experiment?
I tried to create an experiment.
And which option did you select? Web experiment or feature experiment?
I choose web experiment.
Okay, so the web experiment is the GUI-based experiment where you could drag and drop and edit your web pages. But a feature experiment is where you actually send your exposure events to analyze a particular feature. So maybe you want to set it up as like a feature experiment.
Right, which is also nice key, also locked in the growth plan. So
yeah. So if it's not enabled for your plan, then I think that is something that maybe you'd have to check with your account team.
Is that why I can't use the report?
Yeah, that's correct. Because the experiment results chart is not available for everyone. I think it's available on specific plans.
And why does the web plan not allow you to just send exposure events?
Because the web experiment is set up slightly differently. In the web experiment, we only track something that we call impression events. So that is when someone has been exposed to the test. Whereas in feature experiments, we use assignment and exposure. And the feature experiment results chart is what is typically used by customers to analyze the results of their experiment.
Okay, because what I noticed about the exposure events is that they automatically process an assignment event as well. You actually don't need to send an assignment event. When I sent an exposure event, it did both. It created the user properties and did an assignment.
Yeah, there could just be like a one-to-one mapping for an assignment and exposure, because if a user has been assigned to a test, they've also been, if they've been exposed to the test, then they've also been assigned to it as well.
Okay.